Okay, I think everybody is now in from the waiting room. So good evening, everyone. My name is Louise Regan. I'm Vice Chair of PSC, and I will be chairing this evening's session, which I'm really delighted to be doing. Just before we start, just a reminder, which we always start off with at our PSC events, that we have a code of conduct. We expect people to not use any abusive or racist language. We will be posting our expectations around behaviour in the chat. Please have a look at it. Please abide by that. And if you don't, we will be removing people if they don't adhere to those principles. So please be aware of that. Tonight is the first in a series of 4 webinars around understanding apartheid. And tonight, Ben Jamal, our director, is just going to do a brief introduction around why we have made a decision to do this series of webinars, and then I'll go through what tonight's webinar is about and introduce our speakers. So I'm going to hand over to Ben. Very pleased to be here with you, Ben.
Thank you, Louise. And I'm really pleased to echo Louise's welcome. We've got over 800 people who've registered to attend tonight, so we hope to have at least 400 joining us. And as Louise says, this is a series of webinars that's going to run over the next 4 weeks. And to make it simple for people, each one of them is going to take place at this time, 6 p.m. on a Thursday, culminating in the last session on October the 22nd. As Louise says, I just want to say a couple of words about why we've decided to do this. One of the challenges we all face in campaigning for the rights of the Palestinian people is how do we counter the narrative of explanation around Israel-Palestine that is still prominent in mainstream political discourse. And that, of course, is a narrative of territorial conflict or a conflict between different nationalist agendas that requires a conflict resolution approach. And the prominence of that narrative is, I believe, inextricably linked to the failure or the unwillingness of the international community to hold Israel to account. So part of our task within the solidarity movement is to enable the vast majority of people to understand this situation for what it is, a situation of injustice, of the imposition of an unjust structure of power by one people over another people. Now, there are various narrative frames within which we might choose to present or describe that injustice, and we shouldn't regard them as mutually exclusive, whether that is a frame of settler colonialism or whether that is a frame of ethnic cleansing. PSC has believed for some time, for many of the reasons articulated in the article by Nadia Hijab and Ingrid Jaradat that was sent to you in advance of this webinar. If you haven't received it, we will post the link in the chat. We believe that the narrative of apartheid is both accurate and, for the reasons outlined in that article, carries strategic advantages for our campaigning. Now, the crime of apartheid, as defined under the Rome Statute, is inhumane acts committed in the context of an institutionalized regime of systematic oppression and domination by one racial group over any other racial group, committed with the intention of maintaining that regime. So these webinars will look at how that term applies to Israel. And in doing so, we are following the framing and the structure that was used by Professor Virginia Tilley and Richard Falk in the seminal report they undertook for the United Nations in 2017. And again, most of you would have been sent a copy of that report in preparation for today. And again, we will post a link to it in the chat. And that report looks at how does the term apartheid apply to Palestinian citizens of Israel? How does it apply when used against those in the occupied territories, which we will look at next week? How is it accurate in relation to Israel's treatment of Palestinian refugees forced to flee from their homes and denied the right of return? And having established in the first 3 webinars the reality of apartheid, the final webinar is going to look forward. How do we move from apartheid towards a future of freedom justice and equality, and what would such a future look like. So these seminars, these webinars aim to establish that when we use the term apartheid, we are not using it loosely or pejoratively. We don't use it simply to indicate how angry we are at the injustice being visited upon the Palestinian people, or to express how pernicious we think their treatment is. We use it precisely, we use it accurately, and we use it with understanding. And we hope that these webinars will inform all of our understanding of why we use that term. But we also understand that when we use the term apartheid, then certain consequences follow. You do not seek to have normalized relations with an apartheid regime. The appropriate response to apartheid, as we all learned in confronting the South African version of apartheid, is a response of non-cooperation, non-investment, a response of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So that is also our other purpose in undertaking these webinars, as well as establishing that the use of the term apartheid is accurate. We are also establishing and reinforcing that it is legitimate and legitimately leads to a BDS response. And we need to do this because, as you all know, Israel and its allies is engaged in a global process of seeking to delegitimize the term apartheid when applied to Israel and to delegitimize the BDS response to apartheid. And finally, alongside these webinars at PSC, we are also looking to produce a series of videos. We're looking to produce 4 short videos, 2 to 3 minutes each, that will explain the apartheid narrative in terms that we hope will be accessible to a wide audience. We hope to have the first of those videos produced, hopefully in time for the last webinar. So again, thank you for attending. We hope you find tonight and the other webinars informative and engaging. And I look forward to seeing you same time, same place over the next 3 weeks.
Thanks, Ben. A very clear explanation about what we're doing and why, which is really important. I've seen quite a lot of people saying hello in the chat, so please do introduce yourself in the chat and we will use it for questions later. So just to follow on really from Ben, tonight's the first of the webinar in the series, and we're beginning by exploring Israel's discriminatory practices against those Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. So after Israel's foundational act of ethnic cleansing in 1948, the Nakba, or catastrophe in Arabic, around 150,000 Palestinians remained in what became the State of Israel. Today, there are over 1.8 million Palestinian citizens of Israel, and they comprise around 20% of the Israeli population. They mainly live in Arab-majority towns and cities, which make up 8 of Israel's 10 poorest cities. We're really proud tonight to be joined by 2 fantastic speakers to talk to us about the situation. I've heard from both of these speakers previously. They're very good. I know you will find lots of information from both of them, and I'm sure you will have questions, and please do post your questions in the chat and we will take them at the end. So our first speaker tonight is Sami Abu Shahada, MK. He's now a member of the Knesset for the Joint List. He was born in Lod. Sami currently lives in Jaffa and is a long-time political activist. He was a member of the Tel Aviv Jaffa City Council before being elected to the Knesset. And I've heard Sami speak on a number of occasions. He's extremely knowledgeable, and I know you will be very interested in what he has got to say. Welcome, Sami, and thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Louise. Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you in this webinar today. And first of all, I would like to thank PSC for the great work that they've been doing for a long time. This is not the first time I'm talking in their conferences. It's a great pleasure and honor to be part of this series, which is very interesting in my point of view. And we are starting this event I think in the 1st of October every year. We, the Palestinians, the citizens of Israel, we commemorate the second Intifada, Habat al-Quds wal-Aqsa, that started late September 2000 and early October. And I would like to talk a little bit about this event, because I think when we are talking about Israel in the context of apartheid, this is maybe the most clear event that I can think of as a good proof of the Israeli apartheid. But before that, I would like to give some background, and then I will get back to my main issue to talk about the commemoration of the 1st of October, which is maybe very similar to the Bloody Sunday that happened in Ireland a few decades ago. Now, in the case of Israel, anyone who's traveling inside Israel then do not need a tour guide or a lecturer that will join him in order to see discrimination and racism in all fields of life between the Jewish majority and the Arab Palestinian minority who are citizens of the state of Israel. Nobody has to tell you anything. You just drive your car from one place to the other, and it will be your first time in Israel. You would see alone whenever you are seeing the developed Jewish areas and you are going to the underdeveloped Arab areas. You don't need anyone telling you anything. You can see everything simply through your eyes, and nobody has to prove anything or give you some numbers or statistics or any complicated issues. You can see discrimination in all fields of life very easily when you are driving your car in Israel from Arab to Jewish areas. Another very important thing, when we are just saying this fact that you are passing from the Arab and Jewish areas, it's not clear usually to people who are living in the democratic world, because usually all of the cities in the world are mixed cities. You have different parts of the population immigrating to the cities for more academic opportunities or for more job opportunities or something like this. This process, which the whole world is talking about it since second half of the 19th century, of immigration by youth to the cities, in Israel, the whole community is built on racial separation. More than 90% of Israeli citizens, I'm talking, are living on racial separation, Arabs alone and Jews alone. This includes all the big cities in Israel, which are 100% Jewish, like Rishon LeZion is 100% Jewish, Holon is 100% Jewish, same is Ramat Gan, and surprisingly is also Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, which annexed Jaffa, the old Palestinian city, in 1950, have some Arab population, but the Arabs are also concentrated in the Jaffa area. Tel Aviv is also 100% Jewish nearly. This is the case also with the Arab areas. Nazaret is 100% Arab, same as Taiba and Milfahim. All the big Arab areas are also Arab. So the whole state and society in Israel has been built on racial separation between the Jewish majority and the Arab Palestinian minority. Now, in all fields of life, you can see discrimination against the Arab Palestinian minority. We are in everything that you check, in the cultural field or in the economic field or in the political field, we are underrepresented in anything that got to do with planning our present and our future. The state of Israel is being dealt in a way that it is the state of the Jewish people, and it looks totally normal and natural that this state, which was built on the ruins of my people, which was built on the ruins of Palestine and the Palestinian people, is a Jewish state. And because it's a Jewish state, the Jewish majority deserves more in everything. And the way things are planned in Israel, it looks totally normal that the Jews deserve more. Now, everything that you check, you can see that it's planned by the Jewish majority for the interests of other Jews from all over the world, by the way, not only the Jewish citizens in Israel, and that the Arab Palestinians are discriminated in all fields of life. For example, I was a student in Tel Aviv University. My university was built on destroyed Palestinian village, Sheikh Humanize. And lately, a few years ago, the university developed its parking on the ruins of the Islamic cemetery of this village. Same everything that you check wherever you go. But in order to make things a little bit clearer, I would like to concentrate on the example of the events of what we call the 1st of October, which is, as I told you, similar to Bloody Sunday in Ireland. Now, when we are talking about these events, what happened at that time is that there was what they call a leftist Zionist government ruling at that time, led by Ehud Barak, and most of his ministers came from the Labour Party and what is called center-left at that time in Israel. And at that time, the Oslo Agreement reached to one of its problematic times, and they wanted to force Israel wanted to use its force to make Yasser Arafat sign something that he was not convinced that it is good for his people, for the Palestinian people. And then it led to very bad relations. Later on, Barak allowed late Ariel Sharon to go to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, joined by a lot of forces. This brought a lot of anger, and the Palestinians went on the streets to voice up this anger and to tell the Israeli government that we do not agree on humiliating our leadership or our holy places. And the Israeli government reacted in a very violent and inhuman way. In a few days, there were a lot of casualties, a lot of shaheeds in this period. A lot of the Palestinians from within the state of Israel, we, the citizens, went out to the city to demonstrate against this violence, against attacking Masjid al-Aqsa, against attacking the demonstrators, against the killings of our people. The reaction of the state was that 13 citizens were killed by the Israeli police at that time. Now, we are talking about a leftist Zionist government, and at that time, the Minister of Interior Defense was a professor from Tel Aviv University. Now I think he's still in London. His name is Professor Shlomo Ben Ami. This was the minister who was responsible on the police. And the orders were the police were to open all the streets, no matter how much it will cost. And they were allowed to use bullets, live bullets. They were all their armed forces. They were using every violent thing you could think of. And this brought the injuries of hundreds of people. 13 men, mainly young men, Arab Palestinians, were killed during the demonstrations. A lot of them were shot from behind. After a lot of demonstrations, Israel decides to make an investigation committee led by a very famous judge at that time. And this committee decides at its conclusions that the police in the state of Israel deals with the Arab Palestinian minorities like enemies. But they did not think that anyone should be held responsible for that. They can deal with us as enemies, but nobody should pay anything for this. They are allowed to do so. I don't know why. And nobody was held responsible, and nobody was put in jail for the killings of 13 citizens. In the 1st of October every year, we commemorate this very important event. And our main political claims here that we are fighting, we are struggling to have an independent international investigation committee that can do what we all like to do, to bring the criminals to justice. That's all. Now, probably Sausan will continue much more on the 1st of October events. I would like to just say a few more remarks, and then I would love at the end of the session to hear your questions and see what can we answer from all these questions. I would like to tell you a few things as a member in the Knesset. What kinds of, where do we see this racism? What happens? How does racism and apartheid look like in the state of Israel? First of all, you can see the total control of the Jewish majority on all the committees that got to do with planning the present and the future of this place. You see full control of everything that got to do with the natural resources of this place. And you can see that every elite that you check in this part of the world is mainly Jewish, nearly all of it. On the margins, you can see here and there very small numbers of Palestinians. This includes everything that you check, including also, for example, what you know as a very open-minded liberal journal, which is Haaretz, that part of it is also published in English. You should check, for example, how many Arab editors had Haaretz in its century. I can tell you it's very easy, 0. Same representation we have in all the important places in this part of the world. This includes, now we are all in the whole world facing the coronavirus. The coronavirus made it much more clear the racism and discrimination that we suffer from. And with this, I'm going to conclude my talk. For example, I'm a member in the parliament and I'm a member in the education committee. Now in Israel 2020, we have something like 100,000 Arab Palestinians from the Bedouin community in the south, in the Negev desert, who are living in what is called in Israel unrecognized villages. People who are living on their historical land, but Israel do not acknowledge their basic rights that they are living on their historical land, and they are not given any services from the state. We are talking about 100,000 people that don't have water supplies and normal electricity supplies to their houses. Now, what happens with the coronavirus? Their students, their children, first of all, cannot go to school. Second, they cannot also learn by Zoom like what we are doing now, because there is no infrastructure for electricity, and they also don't have computers, they don't have all the basic things that they can do, so they are not studying. Now, we have similar cases for something like 400,000 students, school students in Israel, because of there is no infrastructure in Arab areas, including recognized cities, big cities like Nazareth or Fahim. They don't have normal internet services. So the students cannot study. They don't have basic electricity supplies, but everything here, it's really hard to explain how crazy are the gaps between the Arab Palestinian minority and the Jewish majority inside the state of Israel. And the last thing that I would like to share with you is that at least twice or 3 times every week, I have people who are fighting for their citizenship. Because according to the citizenship law in Israel, which prefers Jews on all the others, any Jew in the world can decide whenever he or she likes to become citizens of the Israeli state. But we, the indigenous community, we, the Palestinian people who have been living here for ages, we are not allowed, for example, to decide with whom do we want to get married, with whom can we, and who should be our partner. If we do not get married with someone from within the state, and if we, for example, would like to get married with our friend or cousin or someone that we knew from the West Bank, he or she cannot become citizens. From the Israeli point of view, that we are not allowed to get married with them. So they can keep here for decades, but they will never be citizens, because from the Israeli point of view, these people were born for the wrong race. They are not Jewish. So the most important basic thing that any citizen needs in the world, which is the citizenship law, is discriminative law that affects our life in everything, including with whom are we allowed to love in the state of Israel and whom we are not allowed to love in the state of Israel. So I'm going to conclude by telling you, in Israel, you don't need anyone telling you anything in order to see discrimination. You can see it simply by your eyes. Just driving a car from one place to the other, you would see the gaps and discrimination in all fields of life whenever you are just passing by your car. Thank you very much, and we'll be waiting for your questions.
Thanks, Sami. Extremely powerful contribution as always. And I think having been on tours with you in Jaffa, I know exactly what you're talking about, but we've had lots of really, really interesting questions, but I'm going to take our next speaker. But just before I do that, just a quick reminder, I did say at the start, please make sure if you're contributing in the chat that you abide by our code of conduct and make sure you do not post anything that's racist or in any way offensive. We are here to learn from each other, but to be respectful, and please treat each and every person with respect. So our next speaker, who I'm very pleased to invite also, is Sausan Zahir. She is a lawyer and director of Social and Economic Rights Unit at Adalah, which is a legal center for Arab minority rights in Israel, and have been there and visited them and heard them speak many times about the work they do. It's extremely informative. So I'm really pleased that Sausan can join us, and I'm sure we'll share. They've got a very good website and information that which I'm sure we'll share in the chat. Please keep posting questions. We've had loads of really good questions. So please keep posting those in. And after Sausan's spoken, we'll move to questions. So over to you, Sausan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise, and thank you for inviting. And I'm happy to see this very high number of participants. It seems that the website, our website, is not that updated. Just one. Yeah, is not that updated, as I am my position now is the Deputy of General Director rather than Director of Social Economic Rights. But I'll get to the point. I think that I'll just build on what MK Sami Abu Shhadi has started to speak about, and I think that speaking about the events or the killing of October 2000 is a very relevant event to start with. As just one moment, because just can't see myself and I don't know where to look in the for some reason. Okay. So 1st of October, as Sami mentioned, is basically the commemoration, and we are now commemorating the 20th year of the October 2000 killings, where 13 Palestinians, mainly young people, were killed by the Israeli police using lethal force and live bullets illegally, and for the first time against Palestinian protesters inside the Green Line. Now, yes, there was an official investigative committee that was established. It did recommend, as Sami said, to investigate the events of October 2000 in order to check and consider submitting indictments against the police, as there was very clear evidence against several police members who shot in cold blood some of the demonstrators. Unfortunately, the recommendations of this official investigative committee, the OR Commission, were not implemented, despite the fact that back then the Attorney General himself, Mazuz, asked to investigate and to inquire the issue, and despite that, nothing basically was done. Until today, you have citizens that are Palestinians who were shot and no one indicted, no criminal investigation open, and therefore no accountability. And the message is that you can shoot the Palestinian as he is the other, as he is the enemy, without being accountable. And this is a very dangerous message. But the question is, was the October 2000 killings the first of their kind against the Palestinian citizens in Israel? Of course not. October 2000 is the third collective memory that Palestinians have within 1948 that basically brought them together as one historic political collective memory. The first was, as we know, the Nakba in 1948. Of course, I'm not getting back to the 1936. 1948, the Nakba was the first collective event. The second was the 1976 Land Day event, where also Palestinian citizens went out to demonstrate against the expropriation and confiscation of their own land by the state of Israel, and 6 Palestinian citizens were killed and no one was accountable. And the third collective political memory for us Palestinians is the October 2000 killing. In neither of these events, none have been accountable, no indictments and no criminal investigations were opened and, of course, conducted. Now, is this surprising? Of course not, because in order to come and examine what kind of relation the state has towards citizens, especially if they belong to a national and ethnic group or minority, and we call ourselves an ethnic and national homeland minority, as a Palestinian homeland minority in the state of Israel, we need to examine the legal system. And when we look at the legal system, we then are clear that the laws in Israel have created this enemy alien doctrine against Palestinian citizens. How do I mean? One of the, before I start with the legal system, just to remind that the state of Israel has been defining itself as a Jewish and democratic state. Now, of course, Jewish cannot come together with a democratic, because you cannot provide ethnic superiority and supremacy to one ethnic group and claim democratic values, which should be based on equality for all citizens. However, in order, from a Jewish Israeli perspective, or a Zionist Israeli perspective, in order to preserve the Jewishness of the definition of the state of Israel, you need 2 components. You need a Jewish majority in terms of demography, and you need the land in order to preserve a physical continuity of having a state. So therefore, we need to look at the laws that were related to land and demography, basically owning property, expropriation of land, confiscation of property, the prohibition of returning back Palestinian property which was owned by Palestinians who became refugees based on the Absentee Property Act. And through all these property laws, we can see that there is a very clear institutional, systematic racial discrimination against Palestinians in Israel in the land regime, owning property regime. And also when we look at demography, one of the first laws that was enacted in what became the state of Israel after the Nakba in 1950 was the law of return, which basically until today provides automatic citizenship for every Jew outside of Israel to enter Israel and acquire automatic citizenship, which is not given to Palestinian refugees. Now, the law of return is also important in order to address one of the examples that MK Sami Abu Shahadi mentioned, which relates to the family unification law. Palestinians today, based on a law from 2003, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza are not allowed to enter Israel for the purpose of family unification. So if I am Sausan from Haifa as a Palestinian citizen, fell in love with a person from Gaza or Ramallah or anywhere in the West Bank, I am not allowed to make him basically to submit an application, allow his entry to Haifa and live together and build a family and establish our own private and intimate life. However, if it was an opposite situation that a Jewish Israeli person was encountered with such a thing, they will be able to basically enable the entry of their partner or spouse based on the law of return. So it created legally, in a legal manner, I mean, not legally, in a legal manner, a classification of citizens, those who are superior and those who are second or third or even fourth class citizen. And this is reflected in a lot of things. This is reflected in budget allocation, in ability to submit application, to live in community towns, which do not allow Palestinians to enter and live based on a law that exists today. This also applies on political participation. And Sami knows that well from the 3 attempts that we had together with his party, with the joint list, where Adala basically represented the joint list, not only in the elections in 2019 and 2020, but also in every election since 2002. And we do represent the joint list because of the mere fact that the basic law Knesset, which has a constitutional status, prohibits anyone from being nominated to the Knesset, like Sami, if he revokes or calls for the revocation of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. Now, no one knows what the exact criteria of revoking the Jewish and democratic state is. No one knows that, but it is clear that it applies only on the Arab political parties and Arab nominees. And in every election, we have to defend and represent members of the Arab political parties. Today, it's the joint list, in claiming and arguing that calling for equality is basically one of the basic values and rights in a democracy, and it cannot be negated. And a person and the nominee cannot basically be dismissed just because they are calling for a state for all its citizens, right? We also know that a lot of the disqualification attempts are targeting Arab political members in allegation of supporting terrorism. But the meaning of terrorism in a Palestinian view, how we view it, even the word, what do we refer to terrorism? When a person is called terrorist, it's not the same narration politically that we have vis-a-vis what the Israeli have. So if we take the regime, and I think that, Ben, you mentioned in the beginning the definition of the crime of apartheid. And we have been together with organizations in the West Bank and in 1948 have been discussing the issue. And I think that for us, it's not merely the examination of the crime of apartheid, it's rather examining the regime of Israel and how it is basically trying to dominate. It's about domination, to dominate the Palestinians on both sides of the Green Line. It's true that it's a different legal system, but it's the same regime of systematic domination and racial discrimination and oppression. So we are talking about a system in different tools that applies on Palestinians in 48, in 67, both in the West Bank, of course, and in Gaza, even if in different ways, but still in a way that politically aims to see Palestinians as an enemy, as a group that it's allowed to oppress, kill, murder without being accountable. And this is also what we see in Gaza and in the West Bank, and not only, of course, we see it there even more in a more severe way than in 1948, and be accountable so that the political vision of what Israel is as a state of the big Israel, the big Eretz Israel from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, which is the biblical political vision, will be implemented. And therefore, by no chance, we had the 2018 Jewish nation state basic law, which also has a constitutional status. It's part of the unwritten constitution in Israel, and it came in order to endorse the constitutional legitimacy of Jewish supremacy all over the land of Israel, from the Jordan River until the Mediterranean. And like, if it's not enough, like if no one can come and say, or if someone wants to dispute the idea of yes apartheid, no apartheid, yes colonialism, no colonialism, I think that looking and examining the Jewish nation state law as a basic law with a constitutional level clearly and directly provides a clear vision of the systematic oppression and domination. And from our point of view as Adala, I think that there might a lot of legal questions might raise in terms of defining the regime, whether it's apartheid or if it's, because we are aware that there are a lot of attempts or different attempts to define the regime, colonialism, settler colonialism, racial discrimination. But I think that this is not the important point, but rather the human rights discourse, because when we are talking about the fact that the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people has been and is being abolished, or there are attempts to abolish it and eliminate it and not enable the Palestinians to fulfill it, then this is what matters, because we can also politically talk about one state with a different character, 2 states, 10 states. The main thing is also to examine, or the basic thing is first as well to examine to what extent the Palestinians have the right on both sides of the Green Line in 48 and in 67, the ability and the right to fulfill and implement their basic right to self-determination. So I'll stop here. I hope that I didn't go beyond my time, and I'm happy to answer the questions that will be posed.
Sam, thank you so much. Both you and Sami were perfect on timing, I have to say. You were both brilliant on timing, but also absolutely fabulous on contribution. So an extremely informative set of contributions. We have had a lot of questions, so I'm going to get straight in to those. So the first one is from Ron. It says, given the fact Israelis and Palestinians are not racial groups, but nationalities, some might question the use of apartheid to describe the systematic oppression of Palestinians. How do we answer this question? So I'm happy for either of you to come back, or both of you.
Should I start, Sausan, or you would like to take it?
Yeah, I'll complete if needed, yeah.
Okay. When I'm thinking about apartheid, I think it mainly means that the same government, the same regime is dealing differently legally with different groups, whether they are national groups or racial groups or any other groups. It's defining the citizens into different groups, and they legally deal differently, different fields of life, according to the law with these groups. Now, Israel greatly suits this definition of apartheid, because I think Israel has developed 5 different kinds of legal systems to deal with the population who are living in the area which is called historical mandatory Palestine. Okay? So you have one legal system, one different set of laws, how to deal with the 2 million Palestinians who are living in Gaza. You have a different set of laws, how to deal with the 3.5 million who are living as Palestinians in the West Bank. You have another different legal system with different sets of laws that deals with the Palestinians who are the residents. They are not citizens, but they are the residents, according to the Israeli definition, of East Jerusalem. And then you have another legal system that deals differently with the Israeli Arab Palestinian citizens, 20% of the population, who are citizens, but from the state point of view, we are not allowed to say that we have a national identity or any national affiliation. According to Israel, we do not have a national identity. And then you have one set of rules, which is for the whole Jewish population who are living all over, in Jerusalem and inside the Greenland and in the West Bank and all over. These have their own different superior legal system. So when you look on Israel legally, you can see 5 different settings of laws that deals with different groups. And what's important in this system is that you have Jewish supremacy over all the others. This is what I have to say about this question. Tfaddali, Sawsan.
Thanks, Sami. Sawsan, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that I'm not sure I have much, like there are a lot to add, but I think that Sami concluded and summarized it in a nice way.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, the next question is, will Israeli Arab partnerships and increasing freedom of travel humanize Palestinians in the eyes of Israelis and equality may prevail? It's quite a difficult question, but anyway, does that make sense to you?
I'm not sure I got the question in terms of
will Israeli Arab partnerships and increasing freedom of travel humanize Palestinians in the eyes of Israelis and therefore allow equality to prevail?
So basically the question assumes that Palestinians are not humanized in the eyes of Israelis?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would want to morally answer the question.
Shall we move on to another question? Because I'm quite confused by that question. We hear from the Israeli side about how Palestinians can both vote and be elected. How can you approach this when raised? So we often hear it's a very democratic, Palestinians can vote, be elected. So why are we saying it's undemocratic?
Yeah, can I get that, Sami?
Yes,
okay.
Of course.
I think that I tried to capture that in my intervention, in my short intervention. Yes, Palestinian citizens have the constitutional right to vote. If they want to vote, they vote. If they want to boycott, they boycott. It's, of course, totally their own freedom. However, it's not the fulfillment of the right to vote, but it is the ability to equally nominate yourself to the parliament. And as I mentioned, based on the constitution, the unwritten constitution of Israel, embedded in Article 7A of the Knesset Basic Law, you are not allowed to nominate yourself as a person or as a political party if you call for the revocation of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And as I mentioned, the facts from 2002 until today, all of them hint to the fact that, and we know that as well politically, that it is intended to focus and aim against the participation, the political participation of the Arab political parties and Arab nominees, trying to basically target them each time, each election cycle, by the fact that their political platform calls for equality for all their citizens. And this means that they intend to revoke and destruct Israel as a Jewish state, just for the mere fact that they call for equality of all citizens in the state of Israel. And the mere fact that we, as the lawyers of the Arab political parties, including Joint List, have to stand before the Supreme Court in Jerusalem and defend each time and convince why full equality provides eligibility to these persons and to these leaders to participate means a lot. So it's a lot about your ability to nominate yourself equally, which doesn't exist, and it is provided and conditioned only if you are working based on what the state of Israel expects you to work for. And we have seen that in a lot of examples where political participation and political activities or parliamentarian activities have been dismissed, and they are very natural from the eyes of the Arab political members, and we have to go each time to court in order to defend these acts.
Thanks, Suzanne. Sami, do you want to add anything? Or are you happy with that?
No, I'm very happy with that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I've just had clarification about the last question, so apologies for that. So the person was referring to the new trade deals and relationships, such as the UAE deal, Israel-Bahrain, Israel-Saudi Arabia, and they were asking, will it help the Palestinian-Israeli relationship as a result? So I'm sure, Sami, you would have something to say about that.
Yeah, of course. I talked a lot about this agreements. They are surely not peace agreements, by the way. I attacked them a lot of times in the Israeli Knesset. First of all, these agreements, you can see their full meaning by when you are checking the Israeli daily newspapers, and you see who are mostly happy with these agreements. And then you would see that in all the Israeli newspapers, you can see that the one who's very happy with these agreements are the weapon industry in Israel, the cyber companies, and all the industry that got to do with weaponry and destruction, because Israel is quite an expert in the world, and it is the most powerful state in our area. So those who are happy with these agreements are mainly the cyber and the destruction companies. If this is the meaning of peace from the Israeli point of view, we surely do not need such a peace. We have enough destruction in the Arab world without destroying it more. To be more accurate, first of all, Bahrain and the Emirates never had a war with Israel. They never fought Israel in order to have a peace agreement with Israel. The issue in our area is that Palestine was occupied by the Zionist movement. Its people were expelled from their homeland, and we have been suffering from discrimination and racism since the establishment of Israel on the ruins of my people and my land. What we are fighting for, what we are struggling for, is to have peace, justice, and equality for all of the people who are living in this area, which is called mandatory Palestine. Any kind of agreement which will not bring us closer to this targets is not good for the Palestinian cause. We are not seeing that big weapon business is good for the Palestinian cause or for anything good in the Arab world. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Sami, a very clear answer. I have a specific question for you, Suzanne, which is around one of the clearest examples of discriminatory law is the acceptance to communities law. Can you briefly explain it? I'm not sure if you can, I'm not sure how briefly it is to explain, but if you could try and explain it briefly, that would be great.
I hope that you mean the admission committee.
Yeah.
The admission committee. Yeah, I did mention it in my intervention as well when I mentioned the fact that the Palestinians are not able to get accepted to community towns. This is a law that from 2011, if I'm not wrong, 11 or 12, which we call it the admission committee law. It applies on almost 600 community towns inside of Israel, where it allows the committees that are in these community towns. They have admission committees, and these committees get applications from families to be accepted and interviewed in order to be accepted to live in the community town. And the law enables having a regulation in these of these committees, basically to dismiss applications if the family is socially or culturally not suitable for to live in the community town, which basically means everything who is not white Jewish. It mostly applies on Palestinian family, of course, but it also applies on gays and lesbians family. It applies on Mizrahi families, but it mainly was legislated and confirmed in order to get rid of the applications and provide legitimacy, constitutional legitimacy for the dismissal of Palestinians. And if we take into consideration the fact that there is like the segregation in housing is huge. The fact that today, like during, until the Nakba, the majority of the land was owned by private Palestinian ownership. Vis-a-vis today, 93% of this land, which was mainly confiscated by the state in one way or another, is owned by the state, and only 3% is owned by private ownership, and some of it, a minority of it, is owned by Palestinian private ownership. So when we look at the regime of property rights and land ownership, and we add to it this admission committee law, which we petitioned against to the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Israeli Supreme Court basically dismissed our petition, claiming that it is not ripe enough to hold judicial review, meaning that it is not ready to pass judicial review. But what does this mean? Basically, this means from the court point of view that they don't have specific cases to examine, even though we brought the specific cases, even though there were previously cases, individual cases that were brought before several courts in Israel, but of course using the ripeness doctrine, claiming that the law is not ready for us as the Supreme Court to review, is one of the ways that the Supreme Court basically can get rid of the issue very, very gently. I hope, and that's in summary, Louise.
It's a very good summary, Sausan. Thank you so much. Right, I'm going to try and get another couple of questions in, and I think, Sami, I'll come to you for this next one. So you've talked, you give a good explanation about how it is for Palestinians living in Israel. A question is coming is, what about Haifa? Are Palestinians and Jewish Israelis separate there as well? And it's often seen as sort of being a sort of very liberal democratic area. So I just wondered what your view was about the situation, or if you could explain to our listeners about what it's like in Haifa.
Okay, so in my talk, I said that 90% of the population are living in what is called racial separation areas. Arabs alone and Jews alone. 10% are living in what is called, according to the Israeli discourse, mixed cities. So the question is, how does life look in mixed cities like Haifa? Now we have Haifa, Akka, Lod, Ramle, Jaffa, little bit Carmiel, Nofagal. We have few areas where Arab population and Jewish population are living together under the same municipality in one city. First of all these areas have Jewish majority. Second, there is total control of the Jews on all the important decision-making process. If you check all these municipalities, you would see that all the important positions are governed by Jews, including Haifa. Now, Jaffa, where I live, is the most mixed city. Now, where do you see apartheid here? First of all, in the education system. Also inside the same city, children who are living in the same neighborhood, in the same building, are going to different education systems. There is one for the secular Jewish community, one for the religious Jewish community, and one for the Arab minority. And of course, wherever you check it, the Arab education system is not that good like the Jewish education governmental system. In the cases, of course, if you go to area like Lot, a central area, that have the Ben Gurion Airport, if you drive your car there, you will be shocked because the Arab neighborhoods are unrecognized neighborhoods. Thousands of people are living there till today, don't have normal water supplies and electricity supplies till today. This is also in the mixed cities. So, you know, if you are talking about apartheid in the case of Israel, the best examples, if you want to go and you will visit what is called a mixed city, including Haifa, and you would see the gaps and discrimination in all fields of life and the different services that are given to the population from the same municipality to the Arab population and to the Jewish population. And you can easily see, don't have to come for a tour for that, you can check the names. You can check the names of all the important positions in these areas, including Haifa, and you would see that since the establishment of the Israeli state, till today, in Haifa's municipality, there was only one important Arab figure in the whole municipality system that tens of thousands of people worked for it since 1948. Thank you.
Thanks, Sami. That was a brilliant response to that. We are very close to finishing, so I'm going to go to Sausan first, just for a final 1 or 2 minutes, just if she wants to sum up anything, then I'll come back to you, Sami, and then we will be closing. So Sausan, over to you.
I think that like my only way to conclude such a discussion is the call and encouragement or encouraging international community like the participants that are here now in our call to continue and act in the ways, of course, that they see fit, because what we are facing is not an issue that we can internally basically deal with alone, whether it's on an activist grassroots ground, whether it's on a legal ground. So I think that the participation or intervention in one way or another of you guys out there is one of the most important things that can be of help from your side. And of course, I would invite everyone, there's no option really to cover all the issues and all the themes. Our website in Adala, which is adala.org, without IL, it's just adala.org, has a lot of information, and it covers a lot of our work since Adala was established in 1996 until today, including all what we have done during the Corona, including our campaign now for October 2000, and our demand, as we mentioned here, to establish an independent inquiry commission that was also endorsed by the High Follow-up Committee, which is basically the highest political level of the Arab leadership for Palestinians in 1948.
Thanks, Sausan. I think James has shared the website in the chat, but obviously you can look that up. But thank you so much. Right, back to you, Sami, for concluding comments, and then I'll do my thank yous and sum up.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you again for this very important series of talking about the apartheid in the Israeli context. Thank you a lot for PSC for your great work that you are doing. I believe that our struggle for justice, equality, peace for all is a very long struggle. It's going to take much more time, and we need a lot of patience. But what's really important here is what Sausan said. People sometimes don't know the importance of this solidarity movements all over the world with the Palestinian people. I would like to tell you as an activist that this important solidarity movement, this important solidarity work gives us a lot of hope. We need a lot of hope in order to be able to continue our struggle for justice and equality for all. I would like to thank everyone for the efforts and for all the work that they do. It's very important for us. Keep on doing this. And I hope it will not take too much time that we will get to justice and equality and peace for everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Sami. I want to thank massively Sami and Sausan. They have been amazing speakers. What a fabulous start to this series of webinars. So informative. And thank you so much for giving up your time. I want to thank Ben, all the PSC staff team who are behind there doing lots of work behind the scenes. I know who have given up their time and done all the organisation of this. And obviously, I want to thank all of you for attending and listening and asking for such fantastic questions. Just remember, this is the first in a series of 4. Every Thursday, next Thursday, we're being joined by Diana Butu and Yara Harari and talking about apartheid in the occupied territory. And I just want to finish by saying this. Both Sami and Sausan has referred to this. Palestinians do not have a voice. We have an obligation to be their voice. We have an obligation to speak out about the injustices that they face. And we have to continue to fight for justice, equality, and freedom for the Palestinian people. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been a fantastic evening. It's been an absolute privilege to chair this session, and safety to all of you. Look after yourselves. Take care.